Can you share your definition of feminism, irritated genie?
Yes. In a nutshell, actually, let me just start by saying we're on our way. Our organization went down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We were invited in by a brother that's down in Louisiana, and anybody that's fighting racism in Louisiana is a freedom fighter, because that's one of the most racist, if you will, overtly anti-black, racist, and violent states in this country. It's really, to some degree, the pulse of racism. And our brother down here, Brother Louis Ali, invited us down for a 3-day course on our entertainment course that we did. And so we're actually driving on our way back up from Baton Rouge, back to where we are based and located in Washington, D.C. And so be that as it may, we're on the road. We wanted to do this interview because we thought it was so important that we tackle a topic that most of our people don't really understand what's happening. And in a nutshell, feminism is the intellectual complement to what we call lesbianism, which is anytime a female, by her own free will, decides to have sexual contact with another female, you have lesbianism. And that is a physical act, that is a sexual act. Well, the complement for that physical behavior that stems out of your called lesbianism is an intellectual construct where the black woman, if we talk about feminism as it relates to black women in particular, black feminism is where a black woman believes that she has a war against men as opposed to believing that her war is against the whites. So in other words, the white feminist in feminism, her mentality is that women, in particular white females, but women in general, are in a war against men. That's the white female construct of feminism. When they get black women to accept the behavior, then a black woman adopts a white female mentality that she is a partner with other women in the world in a war against men, when the appropriate intellectual construct for a black woman is that as a black woman, she is in a war with her men and her children in a war against white supremacy, which includes white males, females, and children.
Oh, okay. Do you think this concept of feminism, and I guess before I even get there, I think a lot of black females would say, hey, we have been mistreated, yes, by white people, but black males, they have mistreated us. They have not done the correct thing. There's no way you're going to sit here and say that black males do not have a long history of abusing black females. What would your response to that be?
My response would be, it depends, because when you use terms like a long history, it is relative. If you are talking about a long history as it's related to how long white supremacy has existed, then that may have some relevance. If it is a long history as it relates to the history of the world and how long we as black people have been on this planet and working with one another, then that is absolutely not true. The reality is, the history tells us that in the history of the world, there has been no stronger relationship between any man and woman of any race than the black man and the black woman. I'll take it a step further. The only race of people whose religious or spiritual construct has always included a male and female complementary God construct is the black man and the black woman. Everybody else in the world has either had a male deity or no deity whatsoever. But for us as black people, the black woman has always been considered, if not equal, in many cases we have what we call maternal civilizations, where the woman is actually the one where the name and the lineage comes down through the woman. So to say that, the point that I'm making is that the most respected woman by her own race, who are living in free and independent construct in the history of the world, is the black woman. Contrarily, if we look at the polar end of that, the white female has always been treated as a sexual toilet and as a lesser of an individual inside of her race. What happens is most of us do not have a proper context of history, nor do we have an understanding of cause and effect. The cause being racism, white supremacy, the effect, black men mistreating black women. And the part that black women tend not to talk about is that in this construct, it is not only that black men abuse black women, but whites have also trained black women to mistreat black men and black boys. So that if not one-sided, we are all equally under a system that trains us to abuse and destroy one another. And that is the part that we very seldom discuss, and that is the part that we don't understand. The reality of it is, if you look in the history of the world as a timeline, it has been a very, very short period of time that black men have mistreated black women. In fact, if you were to put it up on a timeline from the beginning of the world that we know it in history and mark it into 10 periods, with right now being the last period, we wouldn't even have a whole one of those 10 periods that we've been mistreating our women. It has been an extremely short period of time, and it is 100% a result of the fact that we are under a system of domination where from the time we are children, we are trained to abuse and mistreat one another. And as a result, we begin to adopt the behavior and the treatment of one another that our enemy has put on us for so many thousands of years.
I just want to make sure our listeners understand that clearly. Are you saying then that it is and has always been an integral aspect of racism, white supremacy, to manifest conflict between black males and black females?
Yes, sir. In fact, I will say the key ingredient in destroying black people, if you're looking at a relationship or any one thing that you want to do to black people to destroy us as a race of people, you attack the people where they're strongest. The place that we are strongest, the bedrock and the foundation of African civilization or black culture, is the strong, committed relationship between the black man and the black woman. As a consequence, the European number one strategy to destroy the black man and black woman as a race is to divorce the relationship between the black man and black woman. And that is the centerpiece of racism, white supremacy. If we look at the Atlantic slave trade and slavery as a highlight of European oppression of black people, as a earmark of racism, white supremacy, as an example, what we see is they kidnapped us, and before anything else, they separated us. That right there is a major act of warfare of the men against the women, because it is the men's job to protect their women and their children. Under any and all circumstances, regardless of what leads to that, when the men fail to do that, they have failed their women and children. As a consequence, you have created a conflict because their job was to keep them protected. To go a step further, not only did they kidnap us and separate us, then they began to violate our women while we were in bondage in front of us. So now they're creating another thing called resentment, because it's one thing to lose a battle. In most battles, unless you tie, which in most cases you don't, you either win or you lose. But there is a deep sense of resentment from a group of women who are getting abused in the presence of the men that are supposed to be protecting them. So the European was made sure that when they brought us over on the slave ships, when they raided different African villages and civilizations, that they made sure that they made the men stand around and watch as they abused the women and children. Another thing that they did, and these things are all being done simultaneously, but they have a very serious psychological impact. They made black men participate in the abuse of black women. An example, again, from the Atlantic slave trade, the sex farms that they had in America. And if you look up sex farms in pre-colonial America or sex farms during slavery on the Internet, you should be able to find substantial information of the fact that they had sex farms, or look up breeding farms, where they would actually have black men trained to be what they call studs, very much similar to what they would do with horses when they're breeding horses, or dogs when they're breeding dogs. They take the biggest and the strongest of the males, and they force them to impregnate the females. Well, they actually forced black men by white law to rape and impregnate our women, and then abandon those families as they took the women away and took the children away from the women and raised them in different places, and would make a black woman bear 10 to 12 children sometimes, never ever having the luxury of, she'd be lucky if she could raise even one of them. And that man would never even know any of the children that he had created, and many times the same daughters that he would create when they hit puberty, and the slave masters or the Europeans wanted to create more enslaved Africans, they would bring his daughter to him to rape. He would not only not recognize her as his daughter, but he would be forced to rape her and brutalize her and impregnate her. And so now he would have a new child that would be his daughter and his granddaughter at the same time. So by white law, we were forced to do acts of incest, rape, what we would call pimping or prostituting our own women, where they would get the black male to go down to the female quarters and grab a black woman and bring her up to the big house for her to be raped or brutalized, a young girl sometime. The sex farms where Europeans would come to buy little girls or little boys and take them and purchase them and take them back home as sexual slaves and objects, and so that they could exercise their sexual lust on our children. And so that creates a serious calamity in the relationship between black men and black women, because not only are black men participating in the sexual abuse of black women, but we are actually becoming absentee fathers, men who, unlike our civilizations in Africa, where a man, not only would he love any one family he had, but sometimes he was responsible for taking care of 3 or 4 families. And that was a lot of responsibility, but it was also a lot of pride, because he had lots of children. He had a family. He was proud to see these youth be raised, and he took it upon himself as a privilege and an honor to raise his boys to men, his daughters to girls, so that they could keep his lineage going and keep our race going. Now, we were systematically trained as black men to abandon the children that we impregnated our women with and brought into this world. So even though it wasn't necessarily spoken and verbalized directly, there is exceptional resentment, hatred, anger, disappointment, and every emotion that we can think of that black women are feeling under those set of circumstances. And there's an extreme amount of despair, embarrassment, disappointment, lack of self-esteem on behalf of black men who realize that under this system, we cannot properly classify ourselves as men unless we are actively engaged in acts of physical or intellectual or psychological warfare with our enemy. And so, I'm sorry, you still there, brother?
Oh, yes, sir. I'm listening intently. Please continue.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. And so that is what we had a few hundred years ago. Now when we look at what's going on today, they have transferred from a system of physical enslavement to a system of psychological warfare, whereby instead of putting shackles on our bodies and forcing us to do physical labor, through the use of their media, through the use of their schools of miseducation of our people, through the use of their system, for lack of a better term, we'll call it Tomism, where they go out and get what we classify as Uncle Toms, which are black people who, with malice aforethought and